Hello everyone and welcome to another Genshin lore video. Today, I'll be going over the history of the Temple of Silence and how it connects back to other bits of Sumeru's lore. This lore is given to us through a variety of artifact sets, weapons, books, and a lot more. Also, this video does contain spoilers for the quests listed on screen now, so if you haven't done those, you have been warned. Anyways, let's move right on and get into the video. Before we get into the lore behind the Temple of Silence, I want to talk about the rumors that have been spread about this organization. In the present day, many believe that the Temple of Silence is part of the Academia, which is technically true. However, this Temple of Silence is just a front, set up by previous sages to avoid revealing their corruption. This front has worked though, as many now believe that the Temple of Silence handles the custody and disposal of information not meant for the public. The Academia's Temple of Silence was even featured in the book 1,000 Nights, meaning it has been long adopted by the people of Sumeru as part of the Academia. Despite acting as a front, this Temple of Silence does seem to have some level of authority within the Academia. Within the Valley of Dahri, you can find a report from an Academia investigation team left here over 500 years ago. This report mentions an order from the Temple of Silence, which states that all machines from Khaenri'ah are to be sealed. However, this order may have come from the actual Temple of Silence, as their current location at Thamud Oasis was only set up 400 years ago. As such, the fake Temple of Silence may have been set up sometime after the events of the Cataclysm, which actually would make sense. The sages of the Academia at this time were definitely corrupt, as they imprisoned Lesser Lord Kusanali within the Sanctuary of Surasthana. This imprisonment may have been the reason why the true Temple of Silence left for the desert. Now, some rumors surrounding the temple also relate to imprisonment. Some people believe that Faruzan's disappearance 100 years ago was linked to the temple. They thought she came into contact with King Deshret's ancient knowledge and was then secretly imprisoned within the Temple of Silence. As such, many came to think of the temple as a prison of sorts. Of course, these rumors were all shown to be false when we finally got Cyno's second story quest. In this quest, we would visit the hidden Temple of Silence at Thamud Oasis and learn what the organization was really like. Additionally, we learned more about Sumeru's past and the temple's origins. To tell this story, we have to travel back thousands of years, back to the time when King Deshret ruled over the sands of Sumeru. During his reign, King Deshret selected a total of 7 people to act as his 7 sages. The names and titles of the sages are given to us through dialogues of the desert sages and an NPC named Azanath, and are as follows. Dragon King Apep, a supreme spirit. Goat King Harasaf, minister of ministers. Crocodile King Sobek, captain of captains. Ibis King Thoth, scribe of scribes. Hermanubis, greatest of sages. Bennu, most radiant. Sheshapunk, most holy. While I do want to go over the etymology of these names in more detail, I'm gonna save that for a future video. For today, I'll be focusing on one of the sages in particular, Hermanubis. He was picked by King Deshret from among the Tainarians to become one of the sages. While not many Tainarians live in the modern day, Tainari is one of their descendants, and was also named after his ancestral people. Anyways, after King Deshret's fall in the incident with Forbidden Knowledge, Hermanubis would take his followers to the city of Tulaytullah. I've covered the story of this city-state in a previous video, so if you want to know more about the situation in the desert after Deshret's fall, I recommend watching that. Once in Tulaytullah, Hermanubis would found the Temple of Silence, which was dedicated to the preservation of knowledge. His followers would become stewards of knowledge, doing their best to protect this precious information. However, the times after King Deshret's fall were anything but peaceful. Many scrambled to gain power, causing infighting among the Eremites and countless battles across the desert. Eventually, the King of Gurabad would lead an attack on Tulaytullah. Now, quick side note here, this Gurabad is a rebuilt version of the city-state that came about after King Deshret's death. The story about Gurabad that I've covered before took place before King Deshret's fall, meaning the king that invaded here was not one of the characters mentioned in that video. Instead, this king could have been one of the people that I talked about in my aforementioned video on the city-states of the desert and the Tulaytullah weapon series. Speaking of which, Sethos is seen wielding a new polearm that highly resembles the Tulaytullah weapon series, which of course ties back to the temple's origins in Tulaytullah. Getting back into the story, the king of Gorabad would demand the Temple of Silence as proof of his victory. The ruling elite of Tulaytullah would betray the temple, forcing Hermanubis to take action against the invaders. He would shatter himself into many pieces, imbuing his followers with his powers. With this power, they were able to hold their own against the invaders and save the Temple of Silence. After this, they would be ostracized and forced to constantly move for their own protection. Eventually, they made their way into the rainforest, while Tulaytullah fell into ruin. However, they were viewed with suspicion by the people of the rainforest, and they themselves didn't trust the academia in return. Additionally, they saw the sages of the academia as corrupt, likely from their actions of imprisoning Lesser Lord Kusanali, as I mentioned earlier. Sometime after the cataclysm, they would make their way back to the desert, eventually constructing a large hidden temple near Thamud Oasis. This is actually where another city-state of the desert used to be, the Electrum City of Warriors, Saleh. Back at the Academia, the defection of the Temple of Silence would be covered up by the sages in order to hide their corruption. An empty organization with the same name would be set up as a front, hiding the fact that the real temple had left. As I stated earlier, this false organization was responsible for the custody and disposal of information not meant for the public. Again though, it's only a front and remains functionally obsolete. This front worked though, as not many questioned the Academia's Temple of Silence and were unaware of the true temple out in the desert. As time went on, the real Temple of Silence began to decline, mainly due to the lack of Hermanubis' presence. However, the temple still possessed 2 Ba fragments, which were shards of Hermanubis' raw power. The head of the temple, Bamun, decided to implant these fragments into suitable vessels, hoping to bring back the organization into its glory days. However, they soon discovered that the fragments rejected adult bodies, making them unsuitable vessels. As a result, 2 children were chosen to each hold one of the Ba fragments instead. These 2 were Bamun's adoptive grandson Sethos, as well as Cyno, who was given to the temple by his parents for a large sum of mora. Both Sethos and Cyno successfully resonated with the Ba fragments, meaning they were suitable vessels. As Bamun decided upon his next course of action, both of the fragments began to glow. Fearing that they were about to dissipate, Bamun quickly implanted 1 fragment into each child. Soon after, Cyrus, a member of the temple, would leave with Cyno, putting the organization into further decline. Several years later, and still wanting to restore the temple's reputation, Bamun and Sethos would come up with a plan to lure Cyrus and Cyno back to the Temple of Silence. When they all met up within the temple, they decided to resolve the matter through a series of 3 duels. If Cyno won, the temple would release Cyrus, and Sethos would give his Ba fragment to Cyno. If Sethos won, Cyno would instead release his Ba fragment into Sethos' possession. Cyno would have help from his friends in the first 2 duels, with the Traveler fighting in the first and Tighnari fighting in the second. Both of them would win their respective duels, meaning it was down to the final duel between Cyno and Sethos. Cyno would end up winning, and therefore claimed the other Ba fragment. He would then use it to show the true history of the temple in a cutscene, which I went over earlier. Content with the duel's outcome and the reuniting of the Ba fragments, Bamun passed away from a previous ailment. Now, since the temple was to follow whoever possessed the most Ba fragments, Cyno was made the leader of the temple. However, he decided to appoint Sethos as leader instead, as he still had his duties as the General Mahamatra back at the Academia. Additionally, Sethos knew the temple and its people much better, meaning he would be a much more capable leader. As the new leader, Sethos pledged to open the temple's knowledge to all, hoping to work with the Academia again in the future. Anyways, that's pretty much it for the lore of the mysterious Temple of Silence. I really loved getting more lore about the desert, and I can't wait to talk more about the 7 sages. If you want more lore about Sumeru though, I recommend my videos on the rise and fall of Gurabad, the Tulaytullah series, King Deshret, and Nabu Malikata. With that said, I would love to hear what other bits of lore you'd like me to cover in the comments below as well. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Sources and further readings are also in the description if you want to check them out. I hope you all have an amazing day, and I'll see you all in the next video.